Today, we are going to discuss one of my favorite topics, beer. But what you may not know is that beer is made up of 4 simple ingredients. Today I'm going to let you know what they are and describe them a little bit in length so to help hopefully give you a better understanding of these major components of one of my favorite drinks. Let's start with the first one, water. I don't really need to say too much about water, as it's one of the most important components on our planet. It makes up practically everything, so it shouldn't be a surprise to say that water is a very essential part of the beer and the beer making process. The second ingredient, though, is malt. You may ask me, what is malt? Well, malt is a grain that has been changed through a process. And I'll describe this process to you. The first part of the process is called germination. We take the grains, typically it's barley, and you soak them in water. And the germination is essentially tricking the little grains into sprouting, into becoming another plant. You can see the little sprouts on the top here. So this is after the germination process has started. Well, the germination process is essential because it changes the grain and it develops enzymes which are crucial to the brewing process. It can't be done without those enzymes. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Well, when you get to a point with this germination, you want the process to stop. You don't want it to fully grow into new plants, right? So the next step in this process is called kilning. And this is where the grains are basically heated and stirred. They're dried out to prevent that growing from continuing. And this is pretty much enough to be done to the grain to create a beer from it, but with our modern advances in technology, so maybe some of the ancient Egyptians would have stopped there, but now what we have the technology and the processes to modify and roast the grains, which adds color and flavor characteristics. Well, now you may ask me, Eric, how do you go from this grain to this liquid? Well, I'll tell you, the next step is called the mash. And the mash is a process where you take the grains, you crush them, you submerge them in water, and you hold them at a specific temperature range. Typically, it's 146 to 158 degrees Fahrenheit. Wow. And when you suspend the water in that temperature range, those enzymes I described earlier when we were talking about germination, those enzymes, that's their comfort zone. That's where these enzymes go to work, and they convert the starches in the grains into sugars. So you're going from a starchy liquid to a very sweet liquid. And the liquid is called wort. And that is the base of the beer. Once the wort is drained from the grains and separated, that is the beginning of the liquid that you're going to make beer. Now we're going to move into the third ingredient, which is hops. Hops are the flowers of a Humulus lupulus plant. And here's a hop field. And you may
sure
see some similarity here if you've ever been to a vineyard. They look a lot like this. They have the grape plants, but these are actually very tall. They go from 10 to 15 feet in the air. So the hop plants are very high. They need a lot of sun exposure. But here's a close-up of the flowers, or the cones as they call them. These are an essential ingredient to beer making because these hop cones, these flowers, have an oil, and they're extracted. They're a necessary component to add characteristics to the beer. When they're boiled, the oils are extracted, like I just said, and the characteristics they add to the beer, first of all, are flavor. There's a bitterness in that oil, so it adds bitterness, of course, and aroma to the finished product. It also adds stability to the liquid, and it also adds an antibacterial property to the liquid. So it prevents spoilage. So it's one of those things that are essentially in any type of beer, hops are used in some capacity just for that purpose. The final ingredient is yeast. Yeast is a microscopic organism in the fungus family. It's a single-celled organism. the species used for beer is called Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's Latin, hard to pronounce. Anyways, in a really simple diagram, you can see here, here's a yeast cell. After that wort that's been boiled and cooled, you throw the yeast in there, and the yeast eats the sugar, and the byproducts, energy, carbon dioxide, and alcohol. One of my favorite phrases is, man makes the wort, but yeast makes the beer. Because really, it's not beer unless the yeast has actually done its job. So ladies and gentlemen, oh, I'm sorry. I have one more slide I wanted to show you. This is actually a picture of an active fermentation in beer, in making of a beer. So this is the, you can see the foam. That's the carbon dioxide escaping as the yeast are eating the sugars. So it's making this foam bubbles. And this is actually kind of the peak part of the fermentation. This is where the yeast are really going to work and eating up all those sugars. So ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I hope after my speech today, you've got a little more knowledge and information about what the 4 simple ingredients are to making a beer. And I'd like it if you join me in a toast. Raise your glass and say, cheers to beer.
Cheers to beer.
This is Malta. I'm done, by the way, speech over. But,